Good evening, I'm Errol Lewis, and you are watching Spectrum News coverage of the first and only vice presidential debate between Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Ohio Senator J.D. Vance. Let's get some reaction from the panel. Cassie Semyon is with us. You got any instant response from the Harris-Walz campaign?
I'm waiting for some response from them. I did talk to some Democratic Congress members tonight, though. They said they thought Walz did well and did hold his own, despite some of the stumbles and misspeaking that he did experience on that debate stage. He definitely came out a little more timid than Senator J.D. Vance in those early moments of the debate. There was actually a lot of niceties traded between the two men when we were really expecting a slugfest for the gloves to come off and to see more of that attack dog role from these candidates who are running to be the next vice president. We actually saw the strongest moment, I would say, from Walz in the 97th minute of the debate when he asked Senator Vance if Trump lost the 2020 election, and Vance declined to answer. He said that's a damning non-answer, and that's really the only chance for him to prosecute the case that Trump and Vance are a threat to democracy, much like he has out on the campaign trail. That's something we didn't see a lot of tonight, or at least it didn't come across as naturally as it does on the campaign stage versus this debate stage that he shared with Vance tonight.
Okay, let's go over to Taylor Popolars. What is the word from the Trump-Vance campaign? I imagine they're going to declare victory in the debate as well.
They are, Errol. The Trump-Vance team is on cloud nine right now after this debate, and throughout every single moment of it, Trump allies were amplifying soundbite after soundbite after exchange that Vance either had with the moderators or with Walz himself, and they were saying this is exactly why Vance was chosen. I think it's important to zoom out and think about the fact that, yes, Vance has only been a U.S. Senator for about a year and a half, but before he entered politics, he spent several years, in many ways, as a professional talking head. He wrote that well-known book, Hillbilly Elegy, that became a major bestseller. He promoted it all across the country on pretty much every TV news program and radio program imaginable. At one point, he became a CNN contributor. He appeared at all these thought-leading conferences and was used to participating in panel discussions. And he's somebody who likes debating and engaging with people, especially members of the press. So this was a very good and kind of natural environment for him. And I think the Trump campaign was hoping he would perform just exactly as he did. The big question is if Vance managed to either reintroduce himself to the country in any way, because over the last few months, a lot of voters on the trail that I've spoken with, and I've been to 15 states this year, told me that they heard about Vance either from his book or from his comments about women who he referred to as childless cat ladies. And a lot of women voters that I've spoken with were taken aback by Vance's introduction to the country when Donald Trump first chose him in July. So I think Vance viewed tonight as an opportunity to reintroduce himself, and depending on who was watching, they might have seen somebody who they view as a bit more cordial and a bit more open to kind of mature debate than we often see from Vance on the trail, where he's a bit more hard-hitting and a bit more of an attack dog for Trump.
Okay, let's go to our Josh Robin. What are your thoughts about this debate?
I don't like to speak in generalities about like people from the Midwest or us New Yorkers, but the Midwestern nice adage definitely came into focus here. It was a cordial debate. It was policy focused. Vance, I think, really tried to reintroduce himself after what's been a very rocky number of weeks, as Taylor was alluding to, where he became really seen as an albatross on the Trump ticket. Vance's team, the Democrats, I thought, or rather Walz's team, the Democrats did a good job of lowering expectations for him. They made it seem like he was just going to come out bumbling. I think the first 30 seconds he was pretty nervous, but afterwards had quite a polished performance, I would say. I'm not sure if in the whole scheme of things, if this is going to change anyone's mind, Errol. I think that it was a draw, but there was one line that I think will, at least in my mind, is going to last in people. Two lines, I should say. One is when Walz called himself a knucklehead for misspeaking about being in China during Tiananmen Square. It turns out he was there around the time of the uprising, or rather the crackdown. He was there during the uprising, it appears, but not the actual crackdown. The second one was right before that second commercial break, when he was talking, I think, the most passionately, with the exception of abortion rights, about the stake to democracy if Donald Trump is reelected. We actually have that soundbite. Let's take a listen.
Where is the firewall if he knows he could do anything, including taking an election and his vice president's not going to stand to it. That's what we're asking you, America. Will you stand up? Will you keep your oath of office, even if the president doesn't? And I think Kamala Harris would agree. She wouldn't have picked me if she didn't think I would do that, because of course that's what we would do. So, America, I think you've got a really clear choice on this election of who's going to honor that democracy and who's going to honor Donald Trump.
And then it went right to a commercial break after that. So Vance didn't have a chance to respond. Vance's response before that was was to try to rebut Walz's contention that Trump undermined democracy by saying that the Biden administration and Harris engaged in censorship. I thought that Walz might have mentioned this. Actually, the Supreme Court found that it wasn't illegal censorship. This was during COVID when the Biden administration wanted to send out some accurate information about the risks of COVID, and they were allowed to do that. It wasn't considered any kind of illegal suppression of the First Amendment.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go to our Holly Gregory down in Florida. What did you make of the debate?
My first and overall impression was how remarkably civil this was from start to finish, from the handshake all the way to the end when the wives came out and they had that moment on stage where they were all talking to each other. I was really expecting an intense slugfest. And in some ways it turned out to be more of a snooze fest. And I mean that in the best possible sense of the word, because they covered a lot of ground on policy. They disagreed respectfully. They found common ground on some things. You heard J.D. Vance turn to Walz at one point and say, I'm sorry, I didn't realize that your 17-year-old son had witnessed a shooting. He said, Vance, to Walz, if you and Harris win, you'll have my prayers, my wishes, my best wishes, and my help. So I think in such a divided time, to see that play out, you can think, oh, well, maybe we can actually, disagree with each other and not be mortal enemies. It was kind of refreshing. So that really stood out. I think that Vance had a very strong debate. His weakest points were when he had to defend Trump, particularly on January 6th, and also when the Haitian immigrant issue came up. That was a cell phone on Trump's part in the last debate. It's been a disaster for them. They can win on immigration by sticking to the issue and not going down that rabbit hole. So those were his weakest moments. But I think the first rule of these debates, particularly for the vice presidential debates, is first do no harm, because it's the gaffes, it's the replays, the things that are now going to be memes and out on a loop that really stick. And I want you to hear Walz misspoke, I believe, and said something about school shooters, and now that's getting replayed everywhere on social media. Listen.
I sat in that office with those Sandy Hook parents. I've become friends with school shooters. I've seen it. Look, the NRA, I was the NRA guy for a long time. They used to teach gun safety. I'm of an age where my shotgun was in my car so I could pheasant hunt after football practice. That's not where we live today.
There he misspoke and he said, I became friends with school shooters. I think what he meant to say is I became friends with the families of the victims of school shooters. He went on to talk about that. But that has now become a meme, and there's even a Trump Vance yard sign on social media that says not friends with school shooters. I mean, that's just the social media environment that is going to happen after these debates. He also had that gaffe when he was being asked, why did you lie about being in Tiananmen Square during the protests in 1989, and he had this really winding, I grew up in a small town, and he tried to deflect and it wasn't working, and finally he just said, sometimes I'm a knucklehead. That's going to be in a lot of Trump ad campaigns, you can bet.
Okay. Jason Fechner, there in Wisconsin, what were your main takeaways from the debate?
Errol, greetings from the nice Midwest here, but everyone's nice on this panel here. I know you all very well. I would kind of equate this to a baseball game maybe in July, and it's tough as a Milwaukee Brewers fan to talk about baseball after they lost to the New York Mets in the first round of the playoffs tonight, but this kind of felt like a July baseball game, two teams, a fair amount of walks and singles and doubles, no big home runs, no big grand slams, no big ESPN highlights necessarily, and obviously you want to win the game, but the goal is to kind of win the World Series. parties. A good friend of mine sent a Venn diagram during the course of the debate tonight, and in one circle it was people interested enough in politics to be watching the vice presidential debate right now, and in the other circle, undecided voters, and the two circles did not interact or intertwine whatsoever. So whether this has a big impact on what happens in November, I think it's kind of safe to say it probably won't. I think the nice thing, to kind of echo what Holly had said there, the optics of all of this was a very civil debate. Nice to kind of have those moments that we are traditionally used to in the United States that have been kind of hit and miss on television, having the wives of the candidates out there shaking hands with the moderators afterwards. So a civil debate, a lot of issues discussed there. Did anyone have some sort of knockout blow, though, that it actually impacts the results this coming November? I don't necessarily think so.
No, that's exactly right. Okay, thank you for that, Jason. And now, Tim Boyum, you are traveling across the country for your show, Front Porch Politics. You've been talking to voters in battleground states. Well, we'll get more on that in a little bit. But what do you think the undecided voters that you have been talking to, what do you think they saw during tonight's debate?
Well, I think the question's probably, did they see it? Some of them I was talking to today, I didn't even realize that the debate was happening tonight, frankly. You know, Errol, you've moderated a lot of debates, and so have I, and what really stood out to me tonight was it felt like an actual normal debate that we've been lacking, and the moderators have gotten a lot of attention. And one thing I'll tell you about being a moderator is I scan the papers the next day because I don't want my name to be in there, because I want it to be about the debate itself and not something I did or said, and I think that's going to be the case. I thought there were a lot of really good questions that I wish the top candidates would have answered, and that the vice presidential nominees had to answer. And this just shows that it takes candidates in any kind of debate to be on a stage to show at least publicly respect for each other and a willingness to answer questions and not engage just in attacks and not answering questions. So that kind of stood out to me about the overall debate. As far as the impact, here in Michigan and Ohio and Pennsylvania, where we've been the last 3 days, I just don't think it's going to have a lot of impact. Because I don't think a lot of people still know who these candidates are, and we saw J.D. Vance time after time trying to get his personal story in there. Obviously, that was a strategy from them from the very beginning. But, you know, at the end of the day, this maybe gets some attention tomorrow morning, but by tomorrow afternoon, we've got literally missiles flying over in the Middle East. Parts of western North Carolina are literally underwater. The president's going to be going visit some of those areas in North Carolina and South Carolina. There's just so many issues that I think this becomes a distant memory as early as tomorrow afternoon.
A lot of different issues. You are correct, and we'll get back to you with more about your Front Porch Politics, Tim. And so Josh, in fact, I mean, it's a worldwide news organization, and the biggest story in the world right now, the missile attacks on Israel. And they brought that up right off the bat. We've got some sound about how both candidates responded.
But the expansion of Israel and its proxies is an absolute fundamental necessity for the United States to have the steady leadership there. You saw it experienced today, where along with our Israeli partners and our coalition, able to stop the incoming attack. But what's fundamental here is that steady leadership is going to matter. It's clear, and the world saw it on that debate stage a few weeks ago, a nearly 80-year-old Donald.
Okay, what did you make of that response?
Well, he misspoke there. I think he meant the expanse of Iran and its proxies in the region. But apart from that, what Walz was really trying to say is the steadiness. We need someone who's steady. We need someone who's not erratic. We need someone who's going to go back to a negotiated deal, if possible, with Iran. But for the most part, overwhelmingly standing with Israel and agreeing that there should be severe consequences. Didn't mention Palestinian issues at all in that. Just talked about the steadiness. Vance, at that point, so that was the first question I should note. So that was Walz looking a little bit rattled. He had just started, and Vance, I think, was definitely more polished from the beginning. Vance didn't answer it directly at first. He talked first about his biography, and then he got into it. And let's listen now to that sound.
Now, to answer this particular question, we have to remember that as much as Governor Walz just accused Donald Trump of being an agent of chaos, Donald Trump actually delivered stability in the world, and he did it by establishing effective deterrence. People were afraid of stepping out of line. Iran, which launched this attack, has received over $100 billion in unfrozen assets thanks to the Kamala Harris administration. What do they use that money for? They use it to buy weapons that they're now launching against our allies, and God forbid, potentially launching against the United States as well. Donald Trump recognized that for people to fear the United States, you needed peace through strength. They needed to recognize that if they got out of line, the United States global leadership would put stability and peace back in the world.
So, Errol, there you heard it, talking about Trump practicing effective deterrence, peace through strength. As far as the fact-checking on this, there's different reports there. There's some indications from many trusted sources that Iran is really teetering economically, but yet Vance is saying that Iran has reaped oil sales selling to other countries and is able to finance its assertive aggression, many people would call it, in the Middle East. Walz, by the way, his retort to the Trump line was that Donald Trump is fickle. He will go to whoever flatters him. And they both talked about the Iran deal at that time, with Vance saying that Trump was right to get out of the Iran deal. Walz saying that that made the United States and Israel more vulnerable. And again, I really think it was about steadiness versus peace through strength, those lines.
Okay, thank you for that, Josh. And now, Tim, another big issue addressed was immigration. There was some back and forth on that issue. Let's listen to some excerpts from the debate.
Senator Vance, your campaign is pledging to carry out the largest mass deportation plan in American history and to use the U.S. military to do so. Could you be more specific about exactly how this will work? For example, would you deport parents who have entered the U.S. illegally and separate them from any of their children who were born on U.S. soil? You have 2 minutes.
So first of all, Margaret, before we talk about deportations, we have to stop the bleeding. We have a historic immigration crisis because Kamala Harris started and said that she wanted to undo all of Donald Trump's border policies. 94 executive orders suspending deportations, decriminalizing illegal aliens, massively increasing the asylum fraud that exists in our system. That has opened the floodgates. And
He called it asylum fraud, Tim, and basically the process, which is in fact legal, of bringing certain people in if they want to sort of apply for asylum. Vance kind of just took a shortcut and just said, well, as far as I'm concerned, that's illegal.
Yeah, you know, the Trump-Vance campaign has been interesting, trying to see them answer this question about how they would move forward with these deportations. I've interviewed Donald Trump this year and asked him that question, and he told me that they would use local police, essentially. Of course, that is implying that local police would be willing to help with this, unless, of course, they were forced to. But, you know, all these major cities across the country, a lot of them are Democratic, and they're not going to be willing to go out and round up millions of people potentially in this country and send them back. And so this is another one of those issues where, you know, they're pressing these issues, but I'm not so sure any of these answers have a huge impact on voters on this issue, because most of them are on one side or the other, and they're just going to believe J.D. Vance on his side and Tim Walz on the other side, and the top candidates as well. So I don't know if we got through much more of this, except for it's still a very murky answer, particularly for Vance, that we saw there.
All right. Our Elise Underwood is live in Springfield, Ohio tonight. Let's hear what the candidate said about the Trump campaign's allegations about illegal Haitian immigrants, in particular, eating people's pets.
Look, we fix this issue with a bill that is necessary, but the issue on this is what happens when you don't want to solve it. You demonize it. And we saw this. And Senator Vance, and it surprises me on this, talking about and saying, I will create stories to bring attention to this. That vilified a large number of people who were here legally in the community of Springfield. The Republican governor said, it's not true. Don't do it. There's consequences for this. There's consequences. We could come together. Senator Langford did it. We could come together and solve this if we didn't let Donald Trump continue to make it an issue. And the consequences in Springfield were the governor had to send state law enforcement to escort kindergartners to school. I believe Senator Vance wants to solve this, but by standing with Donald Trump and not working together to find a solution, it becomes a talking point.
Okay, so that was Governor Walz. And here's what J.D. Vance had to say about that same topic.
Governor Walz brought up the community of Springfield, and he's very worried about the things that I've said in Springfield. Look, in Springfield, Ohio, and in communities all across this country, you've got schools that are overwhelmed. You've got hospitals that are overwhelmed. You've got housing that is totally unaffordable because we brought in millions of illegal immigrants to compete with Americans for scarce homes. The people that I'm most worried about in Springfield, Ohio, are the American citizens who have had their lives destroyed by Kamala Harris's open border.
Okay, so Elise, you spoke with voters out there about this issue. It's thrust this community into the national spotlight. What's your sense of how they're going to react to this conversation?
Well, you know, I can tell you we're out here at City Hall because residents here in Springfield were definitely watching tonight. It's been such a hot button issue in their community. You know, many people, you know, this is a small town. They grow up here. They stay here. You know, they never thought that their town would receive so much attention, especially this type of attention. You know, some people telling me that just, you know, enough is enough and they want the, you know, harsh rhetoric, the false rhetoric, the narratives to stop. You know, we know that the Haitian immigrants that are here legally under a temporary protective status, and certainly claims about eating pets have been deemed false right away. The topics, though, that J.D. Vance does bring up, like housing, the schools, the healthcare systems, you know, those are true, and that's something that the local leaders here have kind of been saying since day one. And it is a concern for people here, and people here are also really wanting to hear everyday concerns that they have addressed, like homelessness and veterans issues. But, you know, most people here tell me they don't really have a problem with the Haitians, but they do want to see those other topics addressed, and they want that rhetoric to cool down and stop. You know, I thought it was interesting. This topic of Springfield came up within the first 30 minutes of the debate, and was one of those moments where they actually needed the mic cut off, first if maybe only, because it's been so hot topic going back and forth. Walz being the one that actually brought it up. You know, but the silver lining here that we're kind of seeing in Springfield is, you know, just recently this week we've seen the governor allocate $1.3 million to Springfield schools. We've seen a mobile health unit come up within the county. You know, we're seeing the community really come together, a lot of church leaders. So, you know, a lot of people around here say the noise is kind of toned down a little bit, and they're really hoping that it can kind of stay that way leading up to the election.
Okay, thank you for that special report. Very good to hear that folks are, some semblance of normal is starting to resume there in Springfield, Ohio. And so now, Jason, J.D. Vance was asked about not supporting Donald Trump back in 2020. Here's what he said.
Why should Americans trust that you will give Donald Trump the advice he needs to hear and not just the advice he wants to hear? You have 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, Margaret, because I've always been open, and sometimes, of course, I've disagreed with the president, but I've also been extremely open about the fact that I was wrong about Donald Trump. I was wrong, first of all, because I believed some of the media stories that turned out to be dishonest fabrications of his record, but most importantly, Donald Trump delivered for the American people. Rising wages, rising take-home pay, an economy that worked for normal Americans, a secure southern border, a lot of things, frankly, that I didn't think he'd be able to deliver on.
Yeah, so Jason, I mean, that might have been an issue, you know, during the Republican primary season, but do general election voters care if J.D. Vance didn't support Trump 4 years ago and is now his running mate?
Errol, good question, and I think kind of that ship has sailed because this has kind of been at the forefront for a long time now, and J.D. Vance has answered this question multiple times and answered it the same way that he did this evening. And to a certain degree, we also heard from Tim Walz, who discussed his change in how he supports gun rights and kind of learning more about it and changing his thoughts and views on the policy there. So we heard it go back and forth between the two candidates, what they have changed as far as their policies, saying that they have learned more. But as far as is, whether or not undecided voters out there necessarily heard this for a first time during the debate this evening. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think this has come up multiple times at this point.
Right, thanks for that. And now, Josh, at one point, Governor Walz was talking about experts and about common sense. Let's listen to what they were saying in the debate.
Kamala Harris's day one was Donald Trump's failure on COVID that led to the collapse of our economy. We were already before COVID in a manufacturing recession, but 10 million people out of work, largest percentage since the Great Depression. 9 million jobs closed on that. That was day one. Whether it was the Infrastructure Act or other things we moved. Now, you made a question about experts, said this. I've made a note of this. Economists can't be trusted. Science can't be trusted. National security folks can't be trusted. Look, if you're going to be president, you don't have all the answers. Donald Trump believes he does. My pro tip of the day is this. If you need heart surgery, listen to the people at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, not Donald Trump.
Yeah, this in some ways is deeper than just politics. The way it came up in that excerpt there, it's almost like a cultural issue. Who do you believe, right?
Yeah, I don't think it's anything new within the Republican Party, particularly to say that that experts and the Ivy Leaguers can't be trusted, or certainly shouldn't be trusted more than the common person. The irony there is that J.D. Vance went to Yale Law School, but I think that Vance and Walz were hitting on something there that strikes into the minds of different people differently. One is, should you trust a so-called expert? Should you trust a scientist? Should you trust someone who says that climate change is real, that COVID is real, et cetera? Or should you, listen more to what is deemed kind of nebulously common sense? That's something that Vance put forward. I thought that it just spoke to their relative strengths within there. Also, kind of speaking of this, is that Vance name-checked, particularly RFK Jr., who's been spouting all kinds of disproven conspiracy theories about vaccines and so on. But look, that's to a lot of people, that is, they see it as real, they see it as relevant. It's been debunked and it's dangerous, but it is what it is.
No, that's right. And he of course, J.D. Vance really made quite a big show of focusing on this issue of so-called free speech, right? Like, don't check me, don't argue with, like the idea that people should be able to say whatever they want in a way that's not that different from what Donald Trump says about who's an expert and who's not.
Yeah, I agree. I think just generally in this, and this speaks to more of a broader question, J.D. Vance was really a different person than we see a lot on the campaign trail, that particularly Taylor sees because he covers him so closely. He was really polished. At one point, he actually said to Walz, if you win, I'm going to pray for you and wish you luck. This is another question that you're not asking, but I don't know how Donald Trump is going to like that. I wonder if he was too nice in this, and I wonder if Trump might want to get the last word in his own debate.
Yeah, well, we will find out. Let's go to Taylor Popolars. The candidates, as expected, generally stuck to talking points that we've heard before. Let's listen to some of that.
Kamala Harris has such great plans for how to address middle-class problems, then she ought to do them now. Not when asking for a promotion, but in the job the American people gave her 3.5 years ago. And the fact that she isn't tells you a lot about how much you can trust her actual plans.
Yeah, I mean, that's something we've heard a lot from the campaign. In fact, J.D. Vance focusing in on that much more so than Donald Trump.
Yeah, that's right, Errol. And I think it's safe to say that Vance has become the most disciplined messenger on behalf of Trumpism in his journey to becoming Donald Trump's running mate. He's a very effective campaigner, and compared to Trump himself, Vance will go to campaign event after campaign event and will stick to largely the policy issues, even when he's engaging with members of the press and kind of having very public Q&As where his supporters are surrounding him at a rally setting and will boo or respond to us in the press when we ask Vance questions, but he'll still answer and will pivot back to pretty much policy topics. You know, we saw over the weekend Trump held a rally in Erie, Pennsylvania, and then he was in Wisconsin. And at one point, he went off on a tangent where he called Vice President Kamala Harris mentally disabled. Those are not the types of remarks that you hear from Vance on the trail. He will attack the Harris and Walz ticket over and over again, as well as President Joe Biden and their agenda, but he doesn't really make news making the same types of incendiary comments that Trump makes day in and day out. And I think that's something that the Trump campaign likes about Vance. To Josh's point about whether Trump may feel that Vance was almost too nice in this debate, I think in many ways the Trump team realized that Vance got off to a bit of a rough start with old comments he made during his Senate campaign that I covered, resurfacing and going viral, that the Harris and Walz ticket latched onto, and he really had to reintroduce himself tonight, and in so many ways he tried to do that and did that effectively. I think what'll be interesting moving forward is Vance able to kind of stay in that lane? Will Trump allow him? And also, will Vance be able to connect with people and bring any new voters in? But he has been staying on these talking points, and when he goes after the Harris and Walz ticket, especially Harris about her tenure as VP, he leaves out the fact that when Harris and Biden took office back in 2021, there was a very divided Senate. Harris was actually pretty much chained to Capitol Hill because she had to often act as the tie-breaking vote in the Senate, and a lot of the legislative items that the Biden-Harris ticket campaigned on were not possible to become law because of how closely divided Congress was. Obviously, things have changed a bit and ebbed and flowed over the last couple of years, and Harris and Biden have tried to do things through executive order, but Vance has been very critical of them and saying, well, she should have done this now and she should have fixed that. The reality for Vance and Trump, if they win this fall, unless they have a supermajority in Congress, they'll also face a lot of the same roadblocks. So Vance is, of course, a very disciplined messenger, but it's interesting to parse through what he says there.
Absolutely. And Cassie Semyon, reproductive rights is a big focus for the Harris campaign, and Walz sort of carried that into the debate. They got quite a lot into it, including a question about how a law in Minnesota is being interpreted. Was that kind of the winning angle as far as the Harris-Walz campaign is concerned?
Well, abortion rights is absolutely critical to their argument on why the country should elect them president and vice president. I was on the campaign trail in Pennsylvania over the last several days, and I spoke to one voter who said, you know, I have young daughters. This is absolutely the #1 issue driving me to the ballot box this November. I'm concerned for their future, the fact that they might not have bodily autonomy. And so she said she planned on supporting Harris and Walz. It's an issue that has come up time and time again. And while Walz was an effective messenger tonight on this issue and he struggled in others, he's been incredibly effective out on the campaign trail talking about abortion rights, talking about protecting IVF. He's talked about it in the debate, the fact that he and his wife Gwen had used fertility treatments in order to have their daughter Hope. So this is something that has come up time and time again. It's something they're going to continue to hammer home on. And Vance admitted in this debate, you know, Republicans have lost the trust of the American people when it comes to the issue on abortion rights. The Harris campaign saying, of course, well, he could say whatever he wants, but the fact of the matter is he has tied himself to former President Donald Trump, who has taken a lot of pride in the fact that Roe versus Wade was overturned in part because of the 3 justices, the 3 conservative justices that he appointed to the Supreme Court. He's taking credit for it. He takes pride in it out on the campaign trail. So it's really hard for Vance to come out on the debate stage and say, you know, we need to do more on this issue when he is so closely connected to Trump and Trump's remarks on the issue of abortion rights in this country.
All right. Thanks, Cassie. And let's check in with the panel on what you're expecting over the next 5 weeks. Exactly 35 days until Election Day. And Holly, let's start with you.
You know, here we are in this final stretch, and you talk about, we've said all night long, does this debate really matter? You know, do vice presidential debates really move the needle, or will everybody forget about it in the next news cycle tomorrow? I would say that as close as this race is, and I think it is very, very close in the swing states, that any little thing can matter. If this swayed 2,000 people in Pennsylvania, it could make a difference. And so it's going to come down to the ground game because of how tight things are. And there's some anxious consciousness I've heard from the Trump campaign about their ground game in the battleground states. Is it strong? Are they really chasing the ballots like they said they were going to do this time? That is critical. And there's been some angst as to that not being done. There's not enough people on the ground to turn out the vote the way they're going to need to. But the other side of that is I've also heard from the Trump campaign is, no, we're just doing it in a different way. They're going after the low propensity voters, people who they know tend to be conservative, but just haven't voted in the past. They have sought those people out. Now that's a risky strategy because what you do in the past, you might do in the future. You haven't voted in the past, you may not vote this time. But they're trying to go after those voters. But it's a little bit of a risky ground game. It's going to depend on which camp has the best turnout the vote at this point.
Okay, yep. Unfortunately, we've got folks who are traveling and also based in a lot of those swing states. In fact, let's go to one of them. Jason Fechner, what are you going to be watching for over the next few weeks?
We anticipate a lot more high-profile visits. Former President Donald Trump, not one, not two, but 3 campaign stops here over the last few days. He was in western Wisconsin on Saturday, and then he stopped in Ultra Blue, the most liberal-leaning parts of Wisconsin. 2 campaign events today, out in Waunakee there in Dane County by Madison, and here in Milwaukee County as well. And some developing news here late on this Tuesday night. Vice President Kamala Harris coming back to Wisconsin as well on Thursday to Northeast Wisconsin. And WTAQ Radio now confirming that she's going to the very small school of Ripon College. And there's some sentimentality to that, obviously among Republicans, because it was back in 1854 that the modern-day Republican Party started there at Ripon College. So surely that is by design. A big address set for Harris on Thursday. And then we're watching those ground games for both campaigns leading up to November.
Yeah, the Ripon Society is a big think tank with a lot of history behind it. Is this more of the Kamala Harris strategy of trying to pull some moderate Republicans over to her column?
That's 100% it, Errol, and we also saw that with Gwen Walz's wife, Tim Walz. She has spent some time in some very long-time Republican strongholds in Wisconsin over the last couple of days, last week as well. So interesting to see the 2 campaigns. So few independent, undecided voters out there. They're trying to peel from the other side to try to make things work come November the 5th.
Absolutely. Josh Robin, what are you going to be watching for in the next 5 weeks?
Well, one of them is a matter of life and death, is the situation in the Middle East. I think that there's really no question that Israel is going to respond in some way. The question is, how significant is that response, and will the United States respond militarily, or will it be affected militarily by a subsequent Iranian response? We'll have to see. The second is the strike that's ongoing. We'll see if it's going to change prices, see if it gets settled. Third thing, and this is one I really don't know, is does Donald Trump show up to that last debate? It's on October 23rd. Kamala Harris says that she's going to be there in Atlanta. It's on CNN. I don't know. I really don't know what he's going to do.
Oh, interesting. She may show up and try and debate an empty podium. You never know.
I don't know what CNN will do with that.
Okay. So now, Tim, you are taking your show, Front Porch Politics, on the road. You've been hitting up battleground states all around the country. Somehow you got from New York to Lansing, Michigan, and stopped at 3 states in between. Where have you been, and where are you going next?
Yeah, we got a long ways to go, too. Yeah, we've been to the Philadelphia area, we've been to the Pittsburgh area, and we went to Butler, Pennsylvania earlier this morning, where that assassination attempt took place earlier this summer. Then we were in Ohio, Lordstown, former GM plant was there, and we've made our way to Lansing. And tomorrow morning, we're actually going to meet up with some independent voters to, at a pie shop. So we're getting pie for breakfast tomorrow. You should come on up to Lansing, Michigan. But to hear what might be swaying them, what they heard, tonight. Maybe it'll make a difference. And then we're going from Lansing and we're going to go to Wisconsin and go see Jason and his friends in Wisconsin there. And we're going to talk to some dairy farmers. The World Dairy Expo is going on there. Farmers are having a tough time all across the country. And so we're going to talk to them. Some of them feel very neglected. Then we're heading down to St. Louis, Missouri. They got an abortion issue on the ballot there. So we're going to talk to some strategists and folks there and talk about, will that have an impact on the presidential race in November? And then we continue to head west. We're going to visit states like Arizona, Nevada, more battleground states. And we'll end up at the Santa Monica Pier hopefully a week from today.
All right. And you're doing all of this in an electric vehicle.
Yeah, I mean, why not, right? That also has been a part of the presidential, debate, whether the country should move forward and how fast with the EV, how much should you force it? And most people, I think less than 10% of people don't own one, and I've never been in one until yesterday. And so we're trying it out. We're going across the country. We've made it 2 days so far. We got a week to get to California, so wish us luck.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been, when I've been renting cars over the last year or so, when I go visit relatives and so forth, I ask for an electric vehicle. So I've tried a couple of different brands, and everybody says it's the wave of the future. You figure, might as well get into it and get used to it.
Yeah, and you have to plan, right? I mean, we've been to superchargers. We got a Tesla because that's what they had, and they have a huge infrastructure. And, but it takes about 35, 40 minutes. You got to plan around it. We've taken a couple times, but it's been fun so far.
All right. Have a great trip. Many thanks to our brilliant political minds. We have Josh Robin and Tim Boyum. You just heard from Holly Gregory, Jason Fechner, Cassie Semien, and Taylor Popolars. And we thank you at home for watching. Thank you for watching our YouTube channel. Let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage, and click the subscribe button right here. You can also download our app or watch us on TV to learn more about the candidates, where they stand on the issues, and more. We'll see you then.